I used to think the worst things my family could take from me were my money, my time, and a peaceful holiday. I was completely wrong. It only took one sentence: if you will not babysit, then do not come, to crack their perfect facade and reveal a much dirtier scheme hidden beneath the Thanksgiving table. When I finally struck back, the explosion destroyed not just the holiday dinner, but the lie that sustained them for years. My name is Layla Fernandez. I am 34 years old, and I live entirely alone in a small, single-story bungalow tucked away in Belmere, North Carolina. The neighborhood is quiet, the kind of place where the most exciting event of the week is a neighbor trimming their oak tree. My house is not a sprawling mansion, nor is it decorated with high-end designer furniture. But the hardwood floors are solid beneath my feet. The front porch does not creak when the wind blows. And most importantly, the deed sitting in my fireproof safe has only my name printed on it. I bought this place with my own paychecks, saving every spare cent for 5 long years to secure the down payment. Every square inch of this modest property is a testament to my own quiet, unglamorous endurance. For the past 7 years, I have worked as a contract compliance coordinator for Kepler Ridge Projects, a mid-sized civil infrastructure firm that builds things people use every day but never think about. It is a job title that makes people's eyes glaze over at dinner parties, but the work itself demands a relentless, unforgiving kind of logic. My days are spent staring at glowing monitors, hunting down discrepancies in 300-page legal documents. I am paid to identify hidden liabilities, verify insurance certificates, and catch the tiny, seemingly insignificant clauses that could cost the company millions of dollars in lawsuits. I am professionally trained to look for risk. I am wired to notice when the numbers do not add up, and I am paid to ask hard questions when people try to rush an approval. That professional paranoia does not clock out when I leave the office. It bleeds heavily into my personal life. I manage my money with the cold precision of a forensic auditor. On my personal laptop, there is a master spreadsheet that dictates the rhythm of my existence. Every single dollar that enters or leaves my bank account has a designated, color-coded purpose. I log the $85 spent on weekly groceries, the $1,200 for the monthly mortgage payment, and the exact sum of $350 it cost to repair the rain gutter last spring. This spreadsheet is not just a ledger, it is my armor against the world. It is the only reason I can sleep soundly at night, knowing exactly where the financial floor is beneath my feet. The floor beneath my older sister, Savannah, is made of paper-thin ice and maxed-out credit cards. Savannah and her husband, Nolan Mercer, live in Wren's Crossing, a newly built, gated development full of oversized, cookie-cutter houses with perfectly manicured lawns and zero character. Their home is a sprawling, multi-level monument to keeping up appearances. From the outside, looking at the pristine brick facade and the seasonal wreaths on the door, it looks like the ultimate American dream wrapped in a glossy magazine cover. But if you stand close enough, you can smell the distinct, metallic scent of desperation hiding just beneath Savannah's expensive floral perfume. The 2 luxury sport utility vehicles parked in their wide driveway are heavily leased. The designer handbags Savannah flashes on social media are bought on high-interest installment plans, and the air inside their spacious living room always feels suffocatingly heavy with the unspoken panic of impending, unmanageable debt. For as long as I can remember, I have been drafted as the family's designated, unspoken safety net. The unwritten rule was simple and strictly enforced by everyone, including my parents. Layla is single. Layla has no children to feed. Therefore, Layla has endless disposable income and infinite free time to serve the rest of us. It never started with massive, life-altering demands. It was always a sudden, tragic emergency that only I could fix. $200 here to cover a winter utility bill they somehow forgot to budget for. $500 there to help pay for their children's expensive travel soccer league, because Nolan's promised year-end bonus was mysteriously delayed again. The justification fed to me was always the same tired, manipulative refrain. You do not have a real family of your own yet, Layla, so you can afford to help ours. this toxic dynamic reliably reached its absolute peak every single November. For the last 6 years, Savannah has proudly claimed the prestigious title of Thanksgiving host. She is the one who officially invites the extended family, curates the perfect autumnal centerpieces made of dried wheat and miniature pumpkins, and posts flawless, filtered photographs of the dining table on the internet. But the reality operating behind the scenes is a carefully orchestrated, high-stress illusion funded almost entirely by my checking account. I am the one who silently pays for the 25-pound organic, free-range turkey. I buy the expensive ingredients for the side dishes, the cases of sparkling apple cider, the rented wooden folding chairs, the matching linen tablecloths, and the gourmet treats to keep her children pacified. I spend nearly $800 every single year to make my sister look like a flawless domestic goddess to our relatives. And my grand reward for this annual financial hemorrhage? As soon as the extended family arrives and the red wine is poured into crystal glasses, I am seamlessly and forcefully ushered into the back playroom. I am expected to sit on the carpet, keep the 3 young children quiet, and break up screaming fights over plastic toys while the adults sit down to enjoy the expensive appetizers I paid for. It took me a long, painful time to admit the ugly truth to myself. Growing up, you desperately want to believe your family invites you over because they genuinely want your company, because they want to hear about your life and share a meal with you. But as the years stacked up and the receipts grew longer, the pattern became completely impossible to ignore. I was never actually invited to Thanksgiving as a beloved sister or a cherished daughter. I was summoned to the house as an essential operational tool. I was the private caterer, the event sponsor, and the unpaid mandatory nanny, all rolled into one convenient, easily guilt-tripped package. But this year feels fundamentally different. The exhaustion sitting heavy in my bones is not just physical, it is a deep, structural fatigue that has been building for decades. At Kepler Ridge, we just wrapped up a massive, grueling compliance audit that required me to work 80-hour weeks for the better part of 2 solid months. I was running on stale coffee and adrenaline. On top of that severe burnout, my beloved bungalow needed a surprise plumbing overhaul in early September that drained $2,500 straight out of my carefully guarded emergency fund. I am tapped out. I am tired of subsidizing a lavish lifestyle I do not even get to participate in. I am completely tired of buying my way into a family dinner only to be banished from the dining room before the plates are even passed around. So, sitting at my kitchen island with my spreadsheet glowing in the dim light, I made a quiet, immovable resolution. I decided I would still bring a homemade side dish, and I would still show up to the house exactly on time. But for the very first time in my entire adult life, I drew a permanent line in the sand. This year, I will sit in a chair at the main table. I will eat the food I helped provide. And absolutely, under no circumstances, will I babysit. The caller ID flashed my sister's name exactly 7 days before the holiday. Usually, Savannah only called me on a Thursday evening if she needed a quick cash transfer to cover an unexpectedly overdrawn bank account. But the tone of her voice when I answered put me immediately on high alert. It was coated in a thick, sugary sweetness that she exclusively reserved for situations where she was preparing to ask for something massive. "Layla, sweetie," she cooed through the receiver, the artificial warmth practically dripping from the speaker. "I am so glad I caught you. I know you are always so busy with your contract work, but I really need to talk to you about next week. This year is critically important for us." I leaned back against my kitchen counter, watching the digital clock on my microwave shift to 7 in the evening. "Important how?" I asked, keeping my voice entirely neutral. "Well," Savannah began, her words rushing out in a breathless, highly rehearsed tumble. "Nolan has a massive opportunity. We are hosting 2 extremely influential guests from a major firm. It is a huge networking move for his career. Layla, we need to project absolute stability and success. The entire dinner has to be flawless." I waited. I knew the other shoe was suspended directly above my head, just waiting to drop. "So," she continued, her tone seamlessly shifting into a brisk, managerial cadence. "I need you to come over at 8 in the morning. The delivery services are dropping off the raw ingredients, but I need you to handle the heavy kitchen prep work while I get my hair blown out. Then, I need you to set the formal dining table. And the most crucial part, Layla, is the kids. I need you to wrangle them the second they wake up. Keep them completely out of the main house. Keep them down in the finished basement so they do not ruin the decor, and just stay down there with them until all the adults are completely finished eating and having their after-dinner coffee. You know how rowdy they get, and Nolan absolutely cannot have them screaming while he is trying to impress these important guests." The sheer audacity of the request hung heavily in the silence of my kitchen. She was not just asking me to quietly fund the background operations anymore. She was boldly demanding I act as the scullery maid and the basement governess for an entire 12-hour shift. She wanted me hidden away like an embarrassing secret while she paraded around the very event I was heavily subsidizing. I took a slow, measured breath. I channeled the exact, uncompromising tone I utilized when a careless contractor tried to sneak a fraudulent line item past my desk. Calm, unemotional, immovable. "Savannah," I said evenly, "I already ordered the main courses, and I will bring the roasted root vegetables and the pecan pie just like we discussed last month. I will arrive at 4 in the afternoon, right before the guests get there. But I will not be coming at 8 in the morning to prep your house, and I will not be acting as a free babysitter in the basement. I am dressing up, and I am sitting at the dining table this year." The artificial sweetness evaporated from the line so fast it left a freezing vacuum in its wake. There was a sharp, hissing intake of breath. When Savannah spoke again, the pitch of her voice was completely flat, laced with a familiar, condescending poison. "Excuse me," she snapped. She let out a short, humorless laugh that sounded like a glass breaking against a tile floor. "Are you seriously doing this right now? Are you really making this entirely about you? I ask for one simple favor on the most stressful day of the year, and you are overcomplicating a very simple issue just to be difficult." "It is not a simple favor," I replied, strictly refusing to match her rising volume. "It is a full day of unpaid labor. Savannah, I want to participate in the holiday. I want to eat the meal I paid for with the rest of the family." "Do not pull that selfish card with me," she hissed, her voice vibrating with genuine, unrestrained anger now. "You know exactly how much pressure Nolan is under. You know what is at stake for our family. You do not have a husband to support. You do not have children running around destroying your house. You have nothing but free time. Layla, the absolute least you can do is be a team player for once in your miserable, lonely life." The insult was specifically designed to sting, to trigger the old, deeply ingrained guilt that usually kept me completely compliant. But tonight, it just felt completely hollow. I stared at the clean, quiet expanse of my living room, feeling the solid wood floor beneath my socks. I was not miserable. I was just profoundly tired of them. "My answer is no. Savannah," I stated, clearly articulating every single syllable. "I will be there at 4. I will sit at the table." "Fine," she spat out, the word hitting like a physical strike. "If you refuse to help the right way, then do not bother showing up at all. If you will not babysit, then do not come." It was the ultimate, calculated threat, the threat of familial excommunication, the threat of being left completely alone on a major holiday, for a fraction of a second. The old, conditioned panic flared tight in my chest. But before I could even process the weight of the ultimatum, a sharp, electronic click echoed loudly through the speaker. "Layla Marie Fernandez." The voice did not belong to my sister. It was deeper, dripping with heavy maternal disappointment. My mother, Elise Fernandez, had been on the line the entire time. I froze. My analytical mind raced, rapidly reevaluating the entire duration of the phone call. This was not a spontaneous argument between sisters. This was a conference call. "Mom," I asked, the sheer betrayal tasting like copper in my mouth. "I cannot believe how incredibly selfish you are being," my mother continued, launching effortlessly into her favorite rehearsed monologue. Your sister is under an immense amount of stress. Family requires sacrifice, Layla. We all do things we do not want to do to support each other. You are acting like a spoiled teenager over a seat at a table. You should be happy to help your sister when she needs you. It is Savannah's house, another gruff voice rumbled clearly in the background. My father, Martin, he was sitting right next to her. Her house, her rules. You do not get to dictate terms to the host, young lady. You apologize to your sister right now and tell her you will be there first thing in the morning. I stood absolutely still in the center of my kitchen. The refrigerator hummed quietly in the corner. Outside, a neighbor's car drove slowly down my street. Inside the phone, my entire family breathed in unison, waiting silently for me to break. My professional instincts kicked into high gear, laying out the raw data of the situation with brutal clarity. They had meticulously planned this. Savannah had not called me on a whim to ask for help. She had deliberately gathered our parents around her kitchen island, put the phone on speaker, and initiated a highly coordinated ambush. They had held a private meeting, discussed my impending rebellion, and unanimously agreed that the most effective tactic was a unified front of emotional terrorism. They fully believed that if they all pushed hard enough, my boundaries would fold instantly like cheap cardboard. They did not view me as a daughter. They did not view me as a sister. They viewed me as a malfunctioning utility appliance that needed to be aggressively hammered back into working order. Right then, in that exact second, something fundamental finally snapped deep in my chest. It was not a violent, messy, emotional break. It was clean. It was surgical. It was not my heart breaking, nor was it a rush of overwhelming sadness or uncontrollable rage. What shattered completely and irreparably was the very last, lingering illusion I held that these people possessed a single ounce of genuine respect for me as a human being. They did not care about my physical fatigue. They did not care about my endless financial contributions. And they certainly did not care if I ever ate a hot meal with them. They only cared that the gears of their perfect, manufactured image kept turning, and I was the free grease they required to operate the machine. The heavy silence stretched on for exactly 15 seconds. I counted them in my head. I could hear my mother sighing impatiently, waiting for the inevitable apology she was absolutely certain was coming, but the Layla they thought they were talking to was already gone. Before the sting of rejection could settle in my chest, and before the familiar wave of conditioned guilt could tighten my throat, a strange stillness washed over me. When I spoke into the speakerphone, I used the same measured cadence I reserved for informing a corporate vendor that their contract had been terminated for breach of terms. If I am not welcome to sit at the table as a member of this family, I said, every word landing like a flat, heavy stone, then I will no longer act as the financial sponsor for this holiday. For 3 long seconds, the line was completely dead. The sheer, unprecedented shock of my defiance seemed to have temporarily short-circuited their collective processing power. Then, the silence shattered. You are ruining Thanksgiving just because you are being incredibly selfish, my mother snapped, her voice trembling with a mixture of outrage and disbelief. I did not wait for my father to chime in or for my sister to start crying. I tapped the red circle on my screen, and the call disconnected with a soft, final chirp. For the first time in my 34 years, I offered no frantic explanation, no groveling, and no apology for setting a basic boundary. I simply placed the phone face down on the granite counter. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm. The emotional chaos they desperately wanted to provoke had completely failed to materialize. Instead, my brain slipped effortlessly into its most comfortable, highly functioning state administrative execution. I walked over to the small oak desk in the corner of my living room, sat down, and opened my laptop. The screen woke up, casting a cool blue light across my face. I opened my meticulously organized master spreadsheet and navigated straight to the tab labeled November Expenses. There, neatly lined up in rigid rows and columns, was the undeniable proof of exactly who was actually hosting this holiday. I did not act out of a chaotic, burning rage. I acted with the cold, methodical precision of someone systematically dismantling a hazardous structure. I opened a new browser window and began the systematic process of pulling the financial rug right out from under Wren's Crossing. My first target was the local, high-end butcher shop. I dialed their customer service line and gave them my confirmation number. I calmly instructed the representative to cancel the order for the 25-pound pre-brined, organic heritage turkey. The young man on the phone politely informed me that I would lose my 20% non-refundable deposit because the cancellation was happening merely 7 days before the holiday. I told him that was perfectly acceptable, thanked him for his time, and refreshed my inbox until the official cancellation email appeared. I saved it as a portable document format file into a newly created folder on my desktop. Next was the Artisan Bakery downtown. It took exactly 4 minutes and 2 mouse clicks on their web portal to completely void the order for 3 spiced pumpkin pies, 2 deep dish pecan pies, and 4 dozen handmade buttery dinner rolls. Another email confirmation arrived, another file was saved. Then came the heavy logistics. I logged into the account for the premier party rental company Savannah insisted on using every year. She refused to use standard plastic chairs, so I was the one who paid for 12 solid oak folding chairs with ivory linen seat cushions. I was also the one who rented the 2 professional-grade, stainless steel portable food warming chafers because she claimed her double oven was simply not large enough to handle the volume of food. I hit the cancel button on the entire invoice. The system processed a refund of $340 straight back to my credit card, retaining a $50 late cancellation fee. I did not care about the lost fees. Paying a penalty to reclaim my dignity felt like the best investment I had made in a decade. My final stop was the premium beverage delivery service. I wiped out the order for 6 bottles of imported sparkling apple cider, 4 bottles of Reserve Pinot Noir, and 2 12-packs of craft autumn ale. Within the span of 25 minutes, I had systematically dismantled the entire foundation of Savannah's flawless, high-stakes dinner party. I watched the refund notifications populate my credit card app. It was not just about the money returning to my account. It was about the sudden, undeniable physical weight lifting off my shoulders. I had briefly forgotten one crucial administrative detail during my cancellation spree. 3 years ago, when I first set up the account with the party rental company, I had CC'd a shared family email address so Savannah could track the delivery window. I had never bothered to remove it from the automated billing system. My phone, still sitting face down on the kitchen counter, began to vibrate violently against the granite. The buzzing was relentless, a continuous, angry swarm. I walked over and flipped the device over. There were 4 missed calls from Savannah in the span of 2 minutes. A second later, the text messages started flooding the screen in rapid, frantic succession. "What did you just do?" The rental company just emailed me a cancellation notice for the chairs and the chafers. "Layla, answer your phone right now. You cannot do this to me. You are completely humiliating me in front of Nolan's firm partners. Where is everyone going to sit? Call them back and fix this immediately." I stood there, reading the glowing words, feeling absolutely nothing but a hollow, detached sense of vindication. She was not worried about my feelings. She was not regretting her cruel ultimatum. She was only panicking because the invisible scaffolding holding up her grand illusion had just violently collapsed, and she was suddenly staring at the terrifying prospect of having to host a luxury dinner party on her own dime. I refused to turn it into a digital screaming match. Instead of sending a long, emotionally charged paragraph cataloging years of resentment, I typed a single, grammatically perfect sentence. "I am simply not continuing to pay for a withdrawn invitation." I hit send. Then, I went into my phone settings and temporarily muted notifications from her contact, as well as from my mother and father. The kitchen fell back into a deep, peaceful silence. From that exact moment forward, the narrative of the holiday fundamentally shifted. Thanksgiving was no longer a petty, frustrating argument about whether or not I was going to be forced into the basement to watch 3 screaming toddlers. The superficial argument over babysitting had instantly dissolved, revealing the massive, ugly truth hiding beneath it. It had become a silent, brutal war over leverage. It was the ultimate test of who was actually holding this entire family up, and what happens when the load-bearing pillar finally decides to step out of the way and let the roof cave in. To keep myself from softening, from letting that toxic, familiar guilt seep back into my bloodstream, I needed undeniable facts. Feelings could be manipulated by a crying sister or a disappointed mother, but data was completely immune to guilt trips. I sat at my desk and pulled up my master financial ledger. Filtering the records to display the past 36 months, I inserted a brand new, empty column right next to my essential living expenses. I gave it a simple, brutal header, Total Capital. Extracted by family. I began the grueling process of dragging the cursor down the screen, highlighting every single instance where my money had flowed outward to patch the leaking hull of their lives. I categorized the grocery runs for their supposedly casual weekend barbecues, the emergency utility bill bailouts, the borrowed cash that never found its way back, and the exorbitant, recurring holiday sponsorships. As the automated sum formulated at the very bottom of the page, a profound, icy chill radiated down the back of my neck. The final figure was not a manageable collection of trivial, $200 favors. It was a staggering 5-figure sum. It was enough capital to completely demolish and upgrade the entire southern half of my outdated kitchen. It was enough to eliminate a massive percentage of my remaining mortgage principal. It was, at the very least, a robust, fully funded emergency reserve that could have provided me with absolute peace of mind for an entire calendar year. Instead, I had silently burned it all on the altar of keeping up Savannah's domestic illusions and appeasing my parents' demands for familial harmony. The sheer magnitude of the number triggered a dark, deeply unsettling instinct in my brain. My daily work at the compliance firm requires me to constantly scan for anomalies, to look for patterns of hidden risk that others easily gloss over. When a vendor's invoice history looks slightly off, I dig into their past communications. I applied that exact same corporate forensic protocol to my own family. I opened my personal email archive and initiated a deep search using my sister's name and the keywords related to finances. The results that populated on the screen made my stomach drop. 14 months ago, Savannah had sent a frantic message complaining about the awful customer service at her local bank branch. She had explicitly asked me to send her a screenshot of my primary checking and savings account dashboard so she could compare the user interface and the tiered interest rates. I had sent it without a second thought, completely trusting her mundane excuse. 8 months ago, she claimed she was desperately trying to negotiate a higher hourly wage at the upscale boutique where she worked part-time. She asked for a clean digital copy of my official pay stubs, arguing she needed a professional layout to format her own income proposal. Again, I had complied. But the memory that made my hands physically shake as they hovered over the keyboard was a brief, seemingly innocent text message exchange with my mother from late August. I grabbed my phone and scrolled back through the months of mundane family chatter until I found it. My mother had asked, entirely out of the blue, for the exact remaining principal balance on my bungalow. When I casually replied with the precise figure, a number proudly hovering just under $150,000, she had responded with a simple heart emoji. The very next morning, when I called her and asked why she needed my specific mortgage data, she had masterfully deflected the question, loudly complaining about a sudden plumbing issue at her own house and swiftly changing the subject entirely. I stared at the glowing screen, my professional training screaming at me in the quiet room. You do not spend 7 years auditing high-stakes corporate contracts without learning one absolute, unbreakable rule. Nobody aggressively harvests that volume of hyper-specific, sensitive financial data unless they are actively preparing to use it. They knew my liquid assets. They knew my exact debt-to-income ratio. They had proof of my stable, bi-weekly salary, and they knew the precise amount of untethered equity sitting quietly in my property. I did not have a single piece of concrete, legally binding proof yet, but the circumstantial evidence was deafening. The disproportionate, thermonuclear rage they had all exhibited on the phone less than an hour ago suddenly made terrifying sense. Their fury was not the standard, petty annoyance of losing a free built-in babysitter for a Thursday afternoon. It was the blind, desperate panic of losing complete control over a vital asset. By canceling the pie orders and the chair rentals, I had inadvertently signaled that I was no longer a compliant, passive participant in their system. I had just pulled myself free of a much larger, invisible trap. Adrenaline flooded my veins, completely washing away any lingering trace of familial sorrow. I shifted from investigation mode into pure, unadulterated damage control. I navigated to my primary email provider's security dashboard and executed a hard password reset, replacing my old login with a randomly generated 20-character alphanumeric string. I went into my cloud storage settings and systematically revoked all viewing and editing permissions for the shared digital folders we used to swap holiday photos and tax document scans. But that was not enough. If they had my data, I needed a reinforced wall. I opened 3 new browser tabs, logging directly into the official consumer portals for the 3 major national credit bureaus. Moving with rapid, surgical precision, I navigated through their security protocols. With a series of deliberate clicks, I placed a hard, temporary security freeze on my entire credit profile across all 3 platforms. I then activated real-time, comprehensive fraud monitoring alerts linked directly to my Social Security number. When the final confirmation screen loaded, verifying my identity was completely locked down, I leaned back in my desk chair and let out a long, shaky breath. The quiet of my small bungalow felt fundamentally different now. It was no longer the lonely sanctuary of a neglected, unappreciated sister. It was a secured bunker. For the very first time in my life, the heavy fog of guilt lifted, replaced by a cold, razor-sharp clarity. I was no longer looking at myself as the tragic victim of chronic familial ingratitude. I was looking at myself as the prime target of a highly calculated, impending financial ambush. And the trap had just been sprung, entirely by accident, over a plate of roasted vegetables and a rented wooden chair. I did not know exactly what they were planning to do with my name, but I knew with absolute certainty that the war for my future had just officially begun. The morning of the 4th Thursday of November dawned incredibly cold and still in Belmere. I woke up at 9 in the morning. I did not wake up at 5 to start prepping a massive bird, and I did not wake up to the sound of my phone vibrating off the nightstand with an endless barrage of demands. The silence in my bedroom was so absolute, it almost felt heavy. I lay there staring at the ceiling, waiting for the familiar spike of anxiety to hit my chest, the ingrained panic of running late for my shift as the family servant. It never came. I stretched, my bones popping in the quiet room, and finally threw off the heavy duvet. For the first time in over a decade, I did not have to rush out into the freezing air to load my car with a trunk overloaded with insulated carriers, rented folding chairs, and cases of sparkling cider. I walked into my kitchen, tied a simple cotton apron around my waist, and began to cook. The menu I had planned for myself was small, deliberate, and perfectly portioned for one person. I took a modest, bone-in turkey breast from the refrigerator and rubbed it generously with olive oil, fresh thyme, and crushed garlic, while it roasted, filling the bungalow with an incredibly rich, savory warmth. I moved on to the side dishes. I peeled 3 large russet potatoes, boiling them until tender before mashing them with heavy cream and roasted garlic. I snapped the ends off a handful of fresh green beans to cook in a skillet with slivered almonds, and simmered a small saucepan of fresh cranberries with orange zest until they burst into a vibrant, ruby-red sauce. Finally, I assembled a miniature apple pie, crimping the edges of the buttery crust with my thumbs. I was cooking at my own comfortable pace. There was no deadline, no pressure, and absolutely no fear of being criticized for the seasoning. I was cooking out of care, not out of fear. By 2 in the afternoon, the sky outside my window had turned a bruised, metallic gray. A sudden violent gust of wind rattled the glass panes of my kitchen window, stripping the last dead leaves from the oak tree in my front yard. I was just pulling my grandmother's good china from the top cabinet to set my single place at the island when the lights in the house across the street completely gave out. I watched through the blinds as the entire neighboring block plunged into darkness. My own power flickered briefly but held strong on our side of the grid. 10 minutes later, a soft, hesitant knock sounded at my front door. I pulled it open to find my neighbor, Mr. Everett Cole, standing on the porch holding a glass casserole dish tightly covered in aluminum foil. Standing right beside him was his daughter, Rena, wearing a thick wool sweater over her dark blue paramedic scrubs. She had just finished a grueling 48-hour shift the day before. "Layla, I am so incredibly sorry to bother you on a holiday," Mr. Cole said, his breath pluming in the freezing air. "The transformer blew on our street." Rena was right in the middle of baking her famous sweet potato casserole, and I was wondering if we could possibly borrow your oven for about 45 minutes to finish it off. I looked at the two of them shivering on my porch. A week ago, I would have politely taken the dish, baked it, handed it back, and retreated immediately into my self-imposed isolation to nurse my own wounds. But the sharp, paranoid edges I had developed over the past few days suddenly felt entirely unnecessary in this moment. I looked back at my kitchen counter. I had prepared more than enough food to comfortably feed 3 people. The sudden realization hit me that I did not need to shrink into self-pity to validate my pain. I stepped back and pulled the wooden door wide open. "Please, come inside," I said warmly. "The oven is completely free. And honestly, I have way too much turkey for one person. If you do not have any other plans, I would love it if you both stayed and ate with me." They exchanged a surprised, grateful look before stepping out of the wind and into the warmth of my hallway. Rena slid the sweet potato casserole into my oven, and within 20 minutes, we were all sitting around my small dining table. The atmosphere was so profoundly different from the suffocating, high-stakes theatrical productions at Wren's Crossing that it almost made me dizzy. The meal flowed with an easy, unforced rhythm. No one loudly ordered me to get up and fetch a fresh roll of paper towels while I was mid-bite. No one carelessly dumped a screaming toddler into my lap so they could go pour themselves another glass of wine in the kitchen. No one lectured me about my duties to the family or weaponized my single status to force my silence. Mr. Cole complimented the cranberry sauce, genuinely asking for the recipe. Rena poured the water and naturally helped pass the serving bowls. We were simply 3 human beings sharing a hot meal on a cold Thursday. As we finished the main course, Mr. Cole leaned back in his chair, a soft, nostalgic smile crossing his weathered face. "My late wife, Helen, used to host 30 people in our old house," he said, his voice dropping to a gentle timbre. "She ran herself ragged for years. One Thanksgiving, she simply stopped halfway through carving the bird, took off her apron, and sat down at the head of the table. She looked at all of us and said that a holiday is only truly beautiful when the person who cooked the food actually gets to pull up a chair and enjoy it. She never cooked a massive meal again after that, and those later years were the best holidays we ever had." His words struck a chord deep inside my chest, vibrating against a bruised, tender spot I had never quite been able to put a precise name to. It was the simple, devastating acknowledgement of the invisible labor I had poured out for years. Rena, who spent her professional life diagnosing trauma and stabilizing people in the worst moments of their lives, watched my face carefully across the table. "You look completely different today, Layla," she observed, leaning forward slightly. "I see you outside sometimes, coming home from work, and you always carry your shoulders up by your ears, like you are constantly bracing for a physical impact. Today, you actually look like you can breathe." I offered a small, self-deprecating smile. "I recently had to make some very hard cuts regarding my family," I admitted quietly, keeping the darker details to myself. "It has been incredibly stressful." Rena shook her head firmly. "In my line of work, you learn how to spot the physical signs of chronic stress very quickly. People often confuse obligation with love. What you probably cut off was not your family, Layla. You likely cut off an abusive dynamic that was deliberately wrapped up and disguised in the word duty. You do not owe anyone your sanity just because you share a bloodline." Her blunt, clinical assessment cut straight through the remaining lingering fog of guilt, severing it completely. We spent another 2 hours talking, laughing, and eating warm slices of the apple pie. When they finally stood up to leave, thanking me profusely for saving their afternoon, I walked them out to the porch and watched them cross the street back to their dark house. I locked the front door and turned back to face my living room. The bungalow did not feel like a lonely, isolated bunker anymore. The silence was no longer heavy or suffocating. As I gathered the dirty plates and carried them to the sink, the warm, soapy water running over my hands, I realized exactly what had shifted. This small house had just become the very first symbol of a brand new life. It was a life where I was finally treated like a human being, and it was entirely mine. At 8 o'clock that evening, while I was quietly reading a novel on my sofa with a mug of warm herbal tea, my phone screen lit up on the coffee table. It was a text message from my cousin, Tessa Byrne. Tessa was the absolute anomaly within our extended bloodline. She never officially picked sides in any of the generational dramas or petty feuds, mostly because she found our relatives entirely too exhausting to align with. She preferred to sit quietly in the corners of the family gatherings, sipping her drink and observing the chaos with the detached, clinical fascination of a sociologist studying a particularly dysfunctional ant farm. If my mother operated as the family propaganda minister, constantly spinning lies to protect our image, Tessa was the independent investigative journalist who only cared about the raw facts. Her first message was a single, highly descriptive sentence. "Wren's Crossing has officially fallen." I sat up straight, placing my mug down carefully, and typed back asking for the full casualty report. What followed was a rapid-fire sequence of long text messages that painted an absolute masterpiece of domestic collapse. The dominoes had not just tipped over, they had violently slammed into one another, destroying the entire table. The dinner, which was strictly scheduled to begin at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to impress the VIP guests, did not actually commence until nearly 6 o'clock. Tessa described walking through the front door of Savannah's house and instantly being hit by a suffocating wave of raw, unfiltered panic. The foyer, usually pristine and smelling of expensive cinnamon and clove candles, smelled sharply of burnt butter and human sweat. Because I had canceled the rental order, there was a severe seating shortage. Savannah had nothing but her 6 standard dining chairs for a guest list of 14 people. Tessa sent a blurry photograph of the dining room. People were forced to drag mismatched, rolling desk chairs from Nolan's home office and hard plastic patio stools from the freezing back deck just to have a physical place to sit. Without the professional portable warming chafers I usually provided, the logistical flow of the kitchen completely collapsed. The mashed potatoes and the stuffing had gone entirely cold and congealed, while Savannah frantically tried to rotate everything through her standard double oven, nearly burning her hands in the process. And then there was the centerpiece of the meal, because the massive pre-brined heritage turkey had been completely revoked. Savannah had apparently sent Nolan on a desperate, high-speed morning run to the local discount grocery store. He managed to secure a frozen, severely undersized bird that they attempted to speed thaw in the kitchen sink and roast at a dangerously high temperature. According to Tessa, the result was a charred, rubbery disaster that yielded barely enough dry meat to give everyone a proper, full-size slice. The children, usually exiled to the finished basement under my strict, unpaid supervision, were a completely uncontained variable. No one was actively abusing them, and no one was maliciously neglecting them, but without a designated warden to distract them with crafts and quiet games, they simply took over the main floor. They ran screaming through the hallway like wild animals, crashing into the adults, smearing sticky hands on the expensive living room upholstery, and treating the pristine house like a chaotic indoor playground. The other adults, primarily my mother and father, were visibly vibrating with intense irritation. For the first time in years, they were suddenly forced to parent, manage the loud mess, and pour their own drinks instead of being catered to. But the missing food, the mismatched chairs, and the loud children were merely the appetizer for the true disaster. The main course of the evening's collapse revolved entirely around the guests of honor. Nolan had invited a wealthy, highly influential married couple who operated as senior partners at Stonemere Capital Homes, a massive, highly competitive real estate brokerage firm. Tessa explained in her messages that this couple was not there to celebrate a warm holiday. They were there to be heavily courted and manipulated. Nolan was aggressively vying for a lucrative partnership position at their firm, and the dinner was specifically designed to showcase his impeccable domestic stability. He needed to project the image of a man anchored by a powerful, deeply supportive, and flawless family network. Savannah, it turned out, had planned to use me as her ultimate hidden trump card for this exact purpose. I was supposed to be the living, breathing proof of their robust backing. I was the responsible sister who worked in corporate contract compliance, the financially savvy homeowner with a pristine credit score and a spotless record of reliability. Savannah had spent weeks building me up in conversations with the firm partners. I was the human collateral. They intended to parade around the dining room to prove they had serious, established support if anything ever went wrong with their own finances. But the reliable trump card never walked through the front door. Tessa texted me the exact dialogue of the evening's catastrophic climax. Around 6:30, as everyone was awkwardly sawing into the dry turkey while sitting on plastic patio furniture, the senior partner from Stonemere Capital Homes looked directly across the table at Savannah. He politely noted that Nolan had spoken at great length during their business lunches about his brilliant, supportive sister-in-law. The guest then asked point-blank why the woman who was supposedly the unbreakable pillar of the family was completely absent on the most important family holiday of the entire year. The question hung in the dining room air, thick and absolutely suffocating. Tessa said you could hear a pin drop, if it were not for the toddlers screaming over a broken toy in the adjacent room. Savannah fumbled entirely. The flawless hostess routine she had practiced for years shattered into a million jagged pieces under the pressure. Instead of offering a polite, vague excuse about a sudden scheduling conflict or a mild illness, the sheer panic completely overrode her filter. She stammered, her face flushing a deep, blotchy crimson, and blurted out a frantic, venomous lie. She told the wealthy investors that I was severely mentally unstable, that I was prone to hysterical, unpredictable outbursts, and that I had stayed home because I simply loved to ruin family gatherings for attention. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. The desperate lie did not paint Savannah as a long-suffering saint carrying a heavy burden. It only made the atmosphere at the dinner table incredibly radioactive. Tessa noted that the Stonemere executive and his wife exchanged a very tight, highly uncomfortable glance. People of their high caliber and professional standing did not invest their capital in men whose wives loudly and viciously trashed their own supposedly supportive family members over a holiday meal. The air in the room grew immediately frosty. The guests pushed their half-eaten food around their plates, politely declined dessert, and excused themselves from the house before 8 o'clock, citing an early morning flight that everyone knew did not exist. I read Tessa's final text message twice, letting the sheer gravity of the situation settle deeply into my bones. Savannah is currently locked in the master bathroom, crying loudly. Nolan is drinking straight scotch in the dark garage, and your mother is loudly blaming the grocery store for selling them a defective turkey. You did not just dodge a bullet today. Layla, you walked away from a sinking ship. I locked my phone screen and set the device back down on the coffee table. A cold, sharp wave of realization washed over me, completely devoid of any residual guilt, sadness, or pity. I had not screamed at them. I had not thrown a single plate across a room. I had not sent a nasty email outlining their flaws, and I had not demanded a groveling apology. I had literally done absolutely nothing except utter the word no and permanently close my wallet. Yet, by simply refusing to participate in the charade, the grand, glittering illusion of Savannah and Nolan Mercer had spontaneously combusted. Their perfect, enviable life was completely exposed for what it truly was. Their social status, their domestic comfort, and their shiny projection of wealth were not built on a foundation of familial love, hard work, or genuine success. Their entire existence was a fragile theatrical production built entirely on a stage of my unpaid labor, funded seamlessly by my bank account and maintained strictly by my forced silence. The very second I removed my hands from the invisible scaffolding, the whole massive house fell down into the dirt. The certified letter arrived precisely 5 days after the holiday. The delivery driver knocked loudly on my front door at 10 in the morning on a cold Tuesday. I signed the electronic pad, took the stiff cardboard envelope, and carried it into my kitchen. The return address in the top left corner belonged to an entity called Crestline Title and Escrow. Below it, my full legal name and my exact street address were printed in crisp, black ink. I had never done business with this company, nor had I ever inquired about escrow services. A strange metallic taste flooded my mouth as I slid a kitchen knife beneath the flap. The envelope contained a thick stack of legal-sized paper, neatly stapled at the corner. The top sheet was a preliminary disclosure packet for a short-term residential loan refinance. The subject property was my sister's sprawling house in Wren's Crossing. Savannah and Nolan Mercer were explicitly listed as the primary borrowers. I flipped past the standard boilerplate warnings and the amortization schedules. When I reached page 4, my breath caught completely in my throat. There, sitting plainly under a section titled Additional Security, was my name. I was not listed as a character reference. I was formally designated as the supporting guarantor. The fine print beneath the title spelled out the terms with suffocating clarity in the event that the primary borrowers experienced a disruption in cash flow or defaulted on their monthly obligations. The guarantor would become legally responsible for the outstanding debt. They were trying to tether their sinking luxury estate directly to my clean financial record. What terrified me the most was not the audacity of the scheme, but the chilling perfection of the execution. The application was not fully finalized, but the data fields were populated with information that was far too accurate to be a rough estimate. My exact gross annual salary was typed into the income box. The precise remaining principal on my bungalow was listed under my total assets. They had even included the exact routing number of the credit union where I held my emergency savings. I stared at the numbers, recognizing them instantly. These were the exact figures Savannah had harvested from my pay stubs when she claimed she was negotiating a raise at her boutique. This was the exact mortgage balance my mother had casually texted me about in late August. Then, my eyes drifted down to the bottom right corner of the page. Resting perfectly on the designated line was an electronic signature. It was not a generic typed name. It was a digital rendering of a cursive script that eerily mimicked the sharp slant and the loops of my actual, physical signature. Someone in that house had taken the time to practice it. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I ignored it and walked into my home office. Sitting down at my desk, a sudden, sharp memory surfaced. Years ago, before I bought my house, I shared a generic email address with my sister and parents to manage our joint streaming service subscriptions. I had not logged into that account in over 2 years, but my password manager still retained the credentials. I opened a private browsing window and logged in. The inbox was mostly choked with promotional spam and billing reminders, but one message near the top caught my eye. It was forwarded from my mother's email address just 3 days prior. The subject line was blank. It was clearly a massive clerical error on her part, an accidental slip of the autofill feature sending a private family thread to the old shared account instead of directly to Savannah. I clicked the message open. The body of the email contained a forwarded chain between my mother, my father, and my brother-in-law. The most recent message was from Nolan, sent late on Thanksgiving night. I read the words 3 times to ensure my eyes were not deceiving me. Nolan had written, "The broker from Stonemere was completely spooked when she did not show up. The whole point of the dinner was to prove we have high net worth backing. If we had her sitting at the table tonight, surrounded by the family, locking in the commitment part of the paperwork would have been much easier. Now we have to figure out how to get her to authorize the final escrow release without her asking too many questions." I stayed perfectly still. I did not reach for my phone to demand an explanation from my sister or my mother, because the time for family arguments had officially expired. When someone attempts to forge your signature to secure a massive financial liability, you do not call a family meeting. You call a professional. I carefully gathered every single page of the Crestline title and escrow packet. I printed a hard copy of Nolan's accidentally forwarded email. I slid all the evidence into a thick manila folder, grabbed my coat, and drove straight to the business district of Belmere. My destination was the private practice of Mara Keene. Mara was a formidable civil litigation attorney who possessed a fierce reputation in our town. She was widely known for dismantling cases where abusive relatives attempted to bury severe financial fraud under the convenient, socially acceptable guise of a simple family misunderstanding. I sat in her reception area for 45 minutes before she had an opening in her schedule. When I finally sat across the heavy mahogany desk from her, I handed over the folder without a word. I watched Mara's eyes scan the documents. She did not offer a comforting smile. Her expression remained entirely neutral, the sharp, analytical gaze of a predator assessing a fresh trail. "They have not dispersed the funds yet," Mara said, her voice low and raspy, tapping a polished fingernail against the forged electronic signature. "The file is still in the preliminary underwriting stage. But that does not mitigate the severity of what we are looking at here, Layla. The unauthorized utilization of your personal identifying data to secure a loan, combined with this fabricated signature, completely crosses the line from poor family boundaries into the territory of federal wire fraud and false declaration." She leaned back in her leather chair, folding her hands together. "If they submit this final packet to the lender, they are committing a felony. And based on this internal email from your brother-in-law, they fully intended to ambush you into signing the final authorizations under extreme social duress at a holiday dinner." The reality of the situation settled heavily into the quiet space of the law office. The pieces of the puzzle locked together with a sickening, audible click. The perfectly timed phone calls, the sugary sweet requests for my financial dashboards, the unusual insistence that I arrive early to the house, and the sudden, violent rage when I refused to play my assigned role. Savannah did not want me in the basement to watch her children. She wanted me trapped in her house, exhausted, socially cornered, and surrounded by wealthy strangers so Nolan could slide a stack of papers in front of me and demand my signature for the sake of the family's honor. I nodded slowly, looking out the large window of Mara's office. The gray afternoon sky hung low over the town. A profound, irreversible shift occurred in my mind right then. The narrative of the neglected, overworked sister was entirely dead. I was no longer fighting for the basic right to eat a piece of roasted turkey or sit in a comfortable chair. The stakes had ascended to an entirely different stratosphere. I was currently engaged in a brutal, silent war to reclaim my good name, to protect my flawless credit profile, and to fiercely defend the absolute autonomy of my own life against the people who brought me into the world. Under Mara Keene's strict legal instructions, I gave my parents and sister nothing, no calls, no confrontation, and no angry text demanding a dramatic explanation. Instead, I turned my quiet bungalow into a private forensic accounting laboratory. For 3 consecutive evenings, I sat at my kitchen island with my laptop, meticulously backing up every single digital interaction I had ever had with my family. I exported 7 years of old emails, text message threads, and bank transfer receipts. I compiled detailed call logs and saved every single voicemail into secure, encrypted cloud folders. Every financial favor, every subtle guilt trip, every supposed emergency cash request, I documented it all with the cold, detached precision of a corporate medical examiner. The most damning pieces of evidence, however, did not come from my own personal archives. They arrived on a Tuesday evening via a secure messaging application from my cousin, Tessa. She had been quietly sitting in the family's primary group chat, a digital room I had been conveniently excluded from several months ago. Tessa sent me a dozen high-resolution screenshots without any greeting, just delivering the raw data. The first image was a text message from my mother, sent exactly 2 days before the disastrous Thanksgiving dinner. Layla cares too much about the family's face, Elise had typed, her words preserved forever in a bright blue bubble. When she is sitting in front of everyone, with the guests watching, she will not dare to refuse. We just need to get her in the chair. The second screenshot detailed the actual, step-by-step mechanics of the ambush. Savannah had laid the entire blueprint out for our parents. Nolan will wait until after the pie is served, she wrote. He will bring out the folder and pitch it to the table as a simple, short-term formality for the benefit of the whole family. If she hesitates, Dad just needs to remind her about how much we have always supported her. The sheer sociopathy of the written plan was completely breathtaking. They had actively choreographed a psychological hostage situation. They intended to use the sacred facade of a holiday gathering and the heavy presence of wealthy strangers to publicly corner me, forcing me to sign away my financial autonomy in an atmosphere dripping with manufactured emotion. My father, Martin, had masterfully kept his own hands relatively clean of the actual document forgery, but Tessa's screenshots proved he was the lead architect of the social engineering campaign. He had spent the previous 3 weeks casually planting toxic seeds of doubt among our extended relatives. Tessa forwarded an audio message he had accidentally sent to the wrong group chat, where he complained bitterly to my uncle that I was selfishly hoarding my wealth. Layla needs to be more responsible with family assets. His gruff voice echoed through my phone speaker. She sits alone in that house while her sister struggles. We are just asking her to put her unused equity to work for the greater good. Family assets, unused equity. They did not view my hard-earned home as my private sanctuary, nor did they view my salary as the result of my own grueling labor. They viewed my entire life as a communal slush fund that I was selfishly withholding from its rightful, deserving owners. But the final, most devastating cut came when I decided to dig into the actual, hidden purpose of the loan. Savannah had always maintained the desperate narrative that they simply needed a temporary financial buffer to cover the rising property taxes and the suffocating overhead of their Wren's Crossing estate. My professional instincts, honed by years of corporate audits, told me that a massive, rushed escrow packet with a forged guarantor signature was not just about covering utility bills. I spent 4 solid hours combing through county public records, tax assessments, and corporate registry databases. I eventually traced a limited liability company registered to Nolan's name back to a catastrophic commercial venture. It was not about groceries or car payments at all. Nolan had taken a massive, heavily leveraged gamble on a chain of seasonal rental properties near the coast. The investment had completely imploded over the summer, bleeding tens of thousands of dollars in unfilled vacancies and unexpected structural repairs. The short-term refinance on their primary home was a desperate, last-ditch effort to stop the commercial creditors from seizing the coastal rental properties and forcing them into a humiliating public bankruptcy. What I had initially perceived as a petty, exhausting conflict over holiday chores and babysitting duties was actually just the visible tip of a massive, submerged iceberg. I was trapped in a complex network of expectations where my money, my pristine credit score, my professional reputation, and my entire financial future were considered acceptable chips to push to the center of Nolan's gambling table. They were perfectly willing to let me burn completely to the ground just to keep their own house warm. I took this newly discovered mountain of evidence straight back to Mara Keene's office. She sat behind her heavy mahogany desk, reviewing the screenshots and the public property records with a grim, highly satisfied nod. She immediately began drafting the formal legal complaints: identity theft, wire fraud, and a comprehensive cease and desist order that would hit them like a speeding freight train. But before she finalized the paperwork, she folded her hands and looked me directly in the eye. "I can file these tomorrow morning, Layla," Mara said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. "We can freeze the escrow account and alert the state authorities privately, but you know exactly how your mother operates. If we do this quietly, Elise will spin a false narrative to your entire extended family. She will tell everyone that you misunderstood a simple clerical error and maliciously tried to send your own sister to prison out of sheer spite. If you want to end this game permanently, You cannot just beat them in a silent courtroom. You have to ensure that the rest of the family can never twist the truth again. I knew exactly what Mara meant. A private legal victory would only turn me into the ultimate family villain, the unstable, vindictive sister who overreacted to a minor mistake. To truly cut that parasitic tether, I needed them to eagerly engineer their own downfall in broad daylight. With an audience watching, I instructed Mara to keep the records. Then I returned to my bungalow, locked the doors, and waited. I did not contact Savannah or demand apologies from my father. I simply sat in the quiet comfort of my living room, knowing that people on the edge of financial ruin rarely have the discipline to stop while they are ahead. The Thanksgiving dinner had failed, the Stonemere executives had fled, and the clock on Nolan's failing investment was ticking louder every single day. The sheer, suffocating weight of their desperation would inevitably force them to make another move, and when they finally lunged for me again, the trap would be completely set and waiting. The notification chimed on my phone screen precisely halfway through the month of December. The air outside my bungalow was bitterly cold, threatening a heavy frost, but the chill that washed over my arms came entirely from the name flashing on the display. It was Savannah. We had not exchanged a single syllable since the catastrophic Thanksgiving dinner. I unlocked the device and opened the message thread. The block of text was unusually long, meticulously crafted, and practically dripping with an artificial saccharine sweetness. "Layla, I have been doing so much thinking," the message began. "I am so incredibly sorry for how chaotic things got last month. Tensions were just running way too high, and I said things I deeply regret. Mom and Dad are hosting an early Christmas dinner this coming Saturday evening. Just the core family. I really want us to start over and talk through everything like adults. Please come. We miss you." To an outside observer, or perhaps to a naive friend, the message would have read like a genuine, heartfelt olive branch. It had all the correct components of a standard apology, a vague admission of guilt, a plea for reconciliation, and an appeal to familial bonds. But to me, reading it felt exactly like running my bare hand over a blade hidden carefully inside a velvet glove. The air in my living room suddenly felt thick, heavy with the silent, suffocating pressure of a rapidly approaching storm. Less than 2 hours after Savannah sent that text, my phone rang again. This time, it was Mara Keene. My attorney did not deal in sweet apologies or vague promises. She dealt strictly in hard deadlines and legal intelligence. "I just received an interesting piece of information from a contact who handles commercial underwriting." Mara's raspy voice echoed through the receiver. "The short-term refinance application sitting over at Crestline Title and Escrow has a hard, non-negotiable expiration date. If the file is not fully executed and signed by all participating guarantors before the final banking week of the calendar year, the entire offer evaporates. The commercial creditors will move forward with asset seizure immediately after the 1st of January. The pieces clicked together with the deafening roar of a steel vault slamming shut. The sudden burst of holiday spirit, the desperate desire to talk like adults, the carefully worded apology it was all a brilliantly staged theatrical production. Savannah was not inviting me to a healing family dinner. She was building a brand new execution block. They knew they could not corner me at Wren's Crossing anymore, so they were moving the stage to our parents' house. The strategy was brutally transparent. They intended to use the twinkling Christmas tree lights, the nostalgic smell of my mother's cooking, the strategic tears, and the overwhelming collective pressure of the entire family as their final, desperate weapon. They needed that physical signature before the year ran out, and they were willing to orchestrate an entire holiday miracle just to extract it. Instead of ignoring the message or typing out a furious refusal, I took a slow, deep breath. I channeled the exact same cold, immovable energy I used to dismantle their Thanksgiving logistics. I typed 4 simple words and pressed send. "I will be there." The moment the confirmation was delivered, I transformed my home office into a war room. I did not spend the week agonizing over my outfit or baking a delicate dessert to bring to the gathering. I spent the week compiling a weapon of mass destruction. I opened my encrypted folders and began printing. I created a massive, chronologically ordered timeline of their entire financial conspiracy. The first section contained the bank records, every single wire transfer, every cleared check, and every emergency cash injection I had provided to Savannah and Nolan over the past 3 years. The second section documented the surveillance, the printed emails and text messages, where they smoothly manipulated me into handing over my private pay stubs, my mortgage balance, and my exact banking dashboard layouts. The third section was the undeniable proof of the crime. I placed a pristine copy of the forged Crestline title and escrow packet right in the middle of the binder. I used a bright yellow highlighter to illuminate my forged electronic signature on the fourth page. The final section was the killing blow. Thanks to Tessa's quiet espionage, I printed the high-resolution screenshots of the family group chat outlining the exact strategy to trap me. I also transcribed a recent, panicked voicemail Nolan had accidentally left on my old, unmonitored work phone number, a message where he frantically told my father that they just needed to roll the collapsing commercial debt into Layla's guarantee before the bank noticed the discrepancies. I had the actual audio file downloaded, cleaned up, and ready to play directly from my phone screen. I took the heavy, organized binder to Mara's office on Thursday afternoon. She reviewed the physical timeline with a sharp, approving nod. Together, we drafted 3 official, legally binding letters of notification. The first was addressed directly to the senior fraud investigator at Crestline Title and Escrow. The second was bound for the primary mortgage lender underwriting the loan. The third was a formal complaint drafted for the State Financial Crimes Division. Mara poised her hand over her keyboard, ready to hit send and blow the entire scheme apart before the dinner even happened. "Do not send them yet," I instructed softly, placing my hand flat on the polished mahogany desk. "Keep them drafted and ready in your outbox. I will give you the signal on Saturday night." Mara looked at me, a glimmer of profound respect in her dark eyes. "You want them to walk right into it. I want them to build the trap, set the bait, and step directly onto the trigger themselves," I replied. "If we shut it down quietly behind the scenes today, my mother will spend the next 20 years telling every living relative that I maliciously ruined Savannah's life over a simple clerical misunderstanding. They need to say exactly what they want from me out loud. They need to look me in the eye and try to force the pen into my hand." The night before the scheduled dinner, I sat alone on my living room sofa. The street outside was quiet, blanketed in the dark, freezing winter air. A month ago, the sheer thought of walking into a hostile room full of my relatives would have sent my heart rate skyrocketing. I would have been sick to my stomach, trembling with the deeply ingrained fear of their disapproval. But as I stared at the thick black binder resting on my coffee table, my hands were perfectly steady. The frantic, desperate little girl who just wanted to earn her seat at the family table was completely gone. The agonizing pain sitting heavy in my chest had nothing to do with the impending confrontation. What truly broke my heart, in the quiet solitude of that cold Friday night, was the absolute finality of the realization. I was not afraid of losing my family the next day, because I finally understood that I never really had one to begin with. The people waiting for me across town had stopped seeing me as a daughter and a sister a very long time ago. To them, I was just a line of credit waiting to be drained, and they had been perfectly willing to sell me out for years. The dining room inside my parents' house was decorated to look like a heartwarming greeting card, but the air inside felt completely suffocating. It was a perfectly constructed theater set. Thick, pine-scented candles burned on the sideboards. A deep red velvet runner stretched across the long mahogany table, and crystal wine glasses caught the twinkling reflections of a massive, heavily ornamented tree. My mother had deliberately expanded the guest list for this early Christmas dinner, inviting 2 of my aunts and 2 of my uncles. They were not there to celebrate the season. They were strategically positioned as the live studio audience, the designated witnesses who would silently enforce the crushing weight of familial expectation. Savannah played her assigned role of the remorseful sister with terrifying perfection. When I walked through the front door, she rushed forward and wrapped her arms around me, burying her face in my shoulder. She squeezed out exactly 2 delicate tears, apologizing in a soft, trembling voice for the stress of the past month. During the meal, the conversation was aggressively pleasant. Everyone complimented my mother on the perfectly roasted beef tenderloin, and my father offered a booming, cheerful toast to the unbreakable bonds of family. I ate my food quietly, chewing every bite with measured precision, waiting for the inevitable pivot. It arrived exactly 5 minutes after the dinner plates were cleared, right before my mother was scheduled to serve the dessert. The forced laughter died down, and Savannah let out a heavy, perfectly timed sigh. She looked around the table, her eyes wide and vulnerable. "We are just so incredibly blessed to have all of you here," she began, her voice quivering slightly. "Nolan and I have been going through a very tough, transitional season, but we know we are never alone." Right on cue, Nolan cleared his throat. He reached down beside his chair, unzipped his expensive leather briefcase, and pulled out a thick stack of familiar legal documents. He did not hand them to Savannah. He slid them directly across the polished wood, stopping them right in front of my empty dinner plate. On top of the stack was a sleek, silver pen. "Layla," Nolan said, adopting a gentle, deeply patronizing tone. "We just have a tiny, short-term formality to take care of so we can get our family through this rough patch. We need you to authorize a few of these pages. We brought it to you because, at the end of the day, you have always been the strongest, most reliable person in this house." The entire dining room fell completely silent. The aunts and uncles stopped breathing, their eyes darting between me and the documents. This was the trap. This was the moment they fully expected me to look at the smiling faces of my relatives, feel the suffocating pressure of the holiday spirit, pick up the silver pen, and quietly sign away my financial freedom to avoid causing a scene. I stayed perfectly calm. I kept my voice even and left the pen where it was. Instead, I reached under the table, pulled my phone from my pocket, and sent Mara Keene a single one-word text, "Execute." Then, I reached down into my heavy canvas tote bag and pulled out the thick, black binder I had spent the entire week assembling. I lifted it high and dropped it squarely onto the center of the mahogany table. The heavy thud rattled the crystal wine glasses. "Before I authorize anything," I said, my voice echoing loudly in the dead quiet of the room, "I think the entire family should review the supporting documentation." I flipped the binder open. I took the first page, a high-resolution printout of the Crestline title and escrow guarantor agreement, and slid it directly to my uncle sitting on my left. The bright yellow highlighter aggressively illuminated the digital forgery of my signature. "That is a short-term refinance application attempting to leverage my home equity to save Nolan from a collapsing commercial real estate failure," I stated clearly, watching the blood rapidly drain from Savannah's face. "And that signature at the bottom was forged by someone sitting at this table." "Layla, what are you doing?" my mother gasped, her hands flying to her pearl necklace. I ignored her. I pulled out the printed screenshots of their group chats, sliding them down the table so my aunts could clearly read the text messages. These are the documented conversations where Savannah and my parents actively coordinated a strategy to steal my private financial data. They planned this exact dinner to corner me in front of all of you, hoping I would be too embarrassed to say no. Nolan stood up, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. "You are completely crazy. You stole private family messages. This is a massive overreaction to a simple paperwork error." "Is it an error, Nolan?" I asked, my voice dropping to a freezing, absolute calm. I picked up my phone, turned the media volume to its maximum capacity, and pressed play on the audio file I had queued up. Nolan's panicked, frantic voice blasted clearly through the dining room speakers, bouncing off the festive walls. "If we can just get her to the dinner, she will sign it to get it over with because she does not want to ruin the holiday. We just need to roll the commercial debt into Layla's guarantee before the bank figures it out." The audio clipped off. The silence that followed was so profound, it felt like a physical weight. My aunts were staring at Savannah with absolute, unmasked horror. My uncle pushed the forged document away from him as if it were coated in a lethal poison. 10 minutes ago, I announced to the frozen room. My civil litigation attorney formally submitted fraud complaints to the State Financial Crimes Division, the primary mortgage lender, and the escrow company. My credit profile is entirely locked. Any further attempt to utilize my name, my property, or my data will not be handled in a dining room. It will be handled in a federal courtroom. My father slammed his fist against the table, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. You cannot do this to your own sister. This is just a terrible misunderstanding between family members. We were going to explain everything to you tonight. It is not a misunderstanding, Uncle Martin. A voice rang out from the far end of the table. Everyone turned. It was Tessa. My cousin had been sitting perfectly still the entire time, but now she stood up, crossing her arms over her chest. She looked directly at my parents with absolute disgust. I saw the group chat weeks before Thanksgiving. I watched you plan the ambush. There was no misunderstanding. You were trying to use her as a human shield. That was the final, devastating blow. The last remaining mask shattered into dust. The perfectly orchestrated holiday dinner completely dissolved into chaotic, irrecoverable ruin. Nolan began screaming at Tessa, his face contorted in blind rage. Savannah collapsed into her chair, sobbing hysterically. But these were not the delicate, manipulative tears she had shed at the front door. These were the ugly, agonizing tears of a woman who suddenly realized her flawless image, her luxury house, and her social standing were permanently dead. The aunts and uncles who had been brought in to pressure me were now loudly demanding answers, completely turning on my parents. I did not stay to watch the rest of the fire burn. I slowly gathered my black binder, zipped my coat, and stood up from the table. I did not ruin this holiday, I said quietly, though my voice carried easily over the shouting. I simply refused to continue being the foundation for a family that builds its happiness by consuming my life. I turned my back on them and walked straight out the front door, stepping into the crisp, freezing winter night. I got into my car and drove away from Wren's Crossing for the very last time. When I finally pulled into my own driveway, my small bungalow looked incredibly warm and secure against the dark sky. I walked across the street, knocked on the door of Mr. Cole and Rena's house, and spent the rest of the evening sitting by their fireplace, drinking hot chocolate, and starting a brand new holiday tradition surrounded by people who actually valued my presence. Behind me, across town, the illusion of the perfect family had completely collapsed, exactly from the foundation up. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on how I handled my family. Do not forget to subscribe to Zoe Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit the hype button so my story can reach and help even more people who might be going through the exact same thing.